Today's episode is all about the Boss DS-2, John Frusciante's distortion pedal of choice, and it's been his go-to for years now in multiple stints with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And for the Unlimited Love Tour specifically, he added a second Boss DS-2 to his pedal board, and we could only really theorize how he was using each one until now. We have some awesome shots of his pedal board that show settings and some footage of him stepping on one of the pedals for Danny, California, which gives some great insight into how he's using two different Boss DS2s as part of his new sound for the Unlimited Love era. Let's get into today's episode. When we first saw John Frusciante's Unlimited Love World Tour pedal board and realized that there were two Boss DS2s on the pedal board, it was safe to assume that obviously they'd be used for different settings. One most likely for some of his older sounds, and then one set to mimic more of the newer sounds that required off a new album and really a new era in John Frusciante's sound. Now with this pedal board shot you are seeing here, you can clearly see how the DS2s are set, and there really is one difference between both of them. One of them, the one on the right, is set more aggressively in terms of distortion, where the one on the left is actually set just backed off on the distortion a little bit. And you guys all know what the Boss DS2 sounds like in the John Frusciante context. The Danny, California chorus, that wall of sound, that's the Boss DS2, and just such a great example of what that one pedal alone really, obviously in the context of his whole rig, can create in terms of just this massive wall of sound. And thanks to some incredible footage from the Apollo Theater show, we actually know which Boss DS2 John is stepping on for that chorus sound. And it is the DS2 on the left with the distortion knob turned back a little bit compared to the one on the right. Now before you click away from this video to go run and adjust your Boss DS2 to mimic John's settings for the sound, it's really important to remember that those settings work in context with his entire rig. His guitars, the rest of the pedal board, and his amps. With a distortion or overdrive pedal, you really can't just go and copy someone else's settings and expect them to sound the exact same with your own setup either at home or on your own stage if you're out playing a gig. So what you can do, however, is use these as a basis and a rough kind of ballpark of where you could maybe start and set your DS2 to those specific settings, but then tweak them to adjust to how you like it to sound and what you think sounds best, because obviously the exact same settings on this will probably sound different with your amp at home. Even with me having a Marshall JMP 2203, one of the amps John Frusciante is using live right now, I can't still go and copy his settings and get that exact same sound, even with just a few simple chords. The rest of my rig, my pedal board, and my guitars are going to just adjust that sound a little bit, so I'd still have to tweak it, so keep that in mind when you're going and trying to adjust or mimic someone else's drive or distortion settings. You probably won't get the exact same effect just copying them. Use them as a ballpark and tweak them to sound how you want them to. But as for some more theories as to how John Frusciante is using both of these Boss DS2s, clearly the one on the left with less distortion is used for a bit more of a rhythm context, and it kind of makes sense as well when you think about the rest of his entire rig. For example, if he's going to solo with the Variac fuzz or the not right or even the big muff, and he wants to combine the DS2 with one of those fuzz pedals, one that's just set a little less aggressively will just overall stack better, and that could be something that could easily be part of a stacking chain. Now the DS2 that has the distortion knob turned up a little bit more could be more used on its own, or even just for a different sound entirely for a different song, perhaps a different song off of Unlimited Love, especially because that one on the left, if he's using that sound for Danny, California, that's kind of the DS2 sound he was getting during that whole Stadium Arcadium era. So the one that's set a little bit more aggressively might also be for some of the sounds off of Unlimited Love. Now, if we go back to John Frusciante's promotional pedal board, as we call it, the pedal board he was using for the late night television shows on Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel, and look at his DS2 settings there, the whole stacking thing adds up as well, because the DS2 on that pedal board for those performances was set even less aggressively than the least aggressive one on the Limited Love World Tour pedal board. So clearly with less distortion, John Frusciante seems to be stacking and experimenting with to create more kind of larger sounds than just with the one pedal on its own. And obviously with the Boss SD1 as well, he's really experimenting with different levels of drive and distortion and kind of having just not one or two options essentially, because back during the Stadium Arcadium era, for example, if John wanted to have an overdriven sound, he really only had the Boss DS2 and fuzz pedals. So you really had either clean or slightly crunchy with the microamp, or then just full-on distortion at that point with the DS2. Now he has a lot more different levels to choose from, levels of gain and distortion, which I think is really refreshing and just goes to show John's kind of development over the years and the evolution of his tone, especially with an overdrive pedal. We've really never seen him use an overdrive pedal besides the odd time with the Boss DS1 and the Greenwich White Falcon rig back during the Californication era. So it's just the evolution of John's sound as a whole. So I really think kind of the key with the DS2 is back off the distortion and really experiment with how it stacks, probably with the Boss SD1. I think that would be a killer sound. I have to get a Boss SD1 and experiment with this on my own now because I'm super curious to how it sounds. I guess the last thing I should mention is in terms of his DS2s, I personally am not an expert on Boss pedals and how to date them, especially from these images, so I can't tell if they are more newer models or vintage, kind of like he was using back during the Stadium Arcadium era. Now, just looking at them, they both appear to be very clean examples of a DS2, which makes me think that it's very possible that they are more the modern DS2 versions and not the older ones. And if you think of John Frusciante's Limited Love pedal board as a whole, he has a lot of very modern pedals compared to even the Stadium Arcadium era. He's really gone modern and just kind of, not basic, but he's just used a lot of really great modern examples of those pedals. So it would kind of make sense that the DS2s at this point are just the modern equivalents of that pedal. But if you are kind of an expert or know more than I personally do, please leave a comment down below if you can kind of tell if they are the older version or the newer version, because I would be really curious in knowing, and I'm sure everyone else would be as well. And there you guys have it, the two settings that John Frusciante is using for the Boss DS2. It's really sweet that we got these shots and at least know kind of which one John is using for that Danny California chorus sound, because that is a really good benchmark of how the DS2 should sound, especially in the older context of the band. So the fact that we have now seen his settings clearly on the World Tour pedal board is just absolutely awesome. So you guys, I'll be sure to update you on any more shots like this or anything we see of John stepping on pedals. I'll be sure to make lots more videos. If you guys want me to go over the whole Apollo Theater pedal board as a whole, let me know in the comments down below as well, because I can totally make that video, and I think it just would be refreshing to take another good look at his pedal board and go over some of the other settings as well. So if that's something you guys are interested, let me know in the comments down below. But as always, thank you guys so much for the support and sticking with me if you're still with me to the end of this video here. I really appreciate it. We'll see you guys on the next one.